All right. Hey, ladies. It's good to see you tonight. Way to keep going on this, and one more week after tonight. So encouraged by so many people that we get to study with and worship with. We're going to do a little bit of a different schedule for tonight. I sound a little bit funny. Tell me if I can do anything. Okay. We're going to dig into God's word now, and then we are going to go straight back into worship, and then we're going to have table discussion at the very end of the night. So we like to do this every now and then. It just changes up a little bit what our discussion looks like. But part of it is that Lauren sent me her playlist this morning, and I was just listening to it over and over again, and I was like, oh my goodness, it's just so seamless. I am super Essie. Lovo, you hear me? Okay. Yeah, or if I can fix it, sorry. All right. So anyway, that's the plan for tonight. We are going to see what we learned in week 4. I'm sure this has happened to you guys before, but have you ever had a coughing fit where you just can't stop coughing? Have you ever done it when you're on a stage and in front of people? That's even more awkward. So I just decided I'm going to tell you I'm coming off of a head cold. And maybe by saying that, I just won't have a coughing fit when I'm up here. But if I have a coughing fit, I'm not going to think it's weird because we talked about it ahead of time. So that's the plan, right? Like, I'm not going to try and shorten it. I'm not going to try and keep the cough in. All those things would make it worse. We're all friends now, all 350 of us. So that's the plan. And now that we talked about it, I think we'll be okay. So let's jump in. This week, we are in 2 Peter chapter 2. And we started off this week of study, and Peter was still talking about false teachers. And I don't know if you were like me, but I was like, oh, still? We get it, Peter. We get it. They're bad. We're not going to listen to them, right? But guys, we have to trust Peter because he was inspired by the Spirit of God to write this and to continue teaching us about false teachers. And I promise that God's going to show up and we are going to be able to learn a lot about God and a lot about ourselves tonight. So how did Peter start? Well, he calls these false teachers bold and arrogant. And he gives us vivid descriptions, not just about what they're teaching, but how they're living, which is a sermon in itself, right? So very vivid descriptions, a lot of play on words, and he calls them irrational beasts. And I hope that we were curious enough students to say, why would you call them that? Why would you call them irrational beast? Well, there's a lot there, but essentially what he's doing is insulting them, right? This is a good old biblical insult because what Peter is doing here is he's playing off of something from Genesis 1 and 2. See, in the beginning, in the Garden of Eden, God made humans to have dominion over the animals, over the beast, over the crawling things. And so they were supposed to rule. And these false teachers, the way they're living, it's so irrational. It's so wild. It's like they're just brute animals. He's saying you're just like slaves to instincts. You have essentially, you false teachers, have descended into subhuman ways. You are foolish and you're reckless. So what we need to understand is Peter is saying this is far from what God intended. Okay? And then he continues, these false teachers, they give a pass for every sin. Well, why? Why are they saying, oh, that's fine, that's good, do that? Well, because they are teaching that there's no return of Christ. They are saying because there's no return of Christ, that teaching isn't true, then there is no future judgment day. There's no future consequences, essentially. So there's no reason not to sin. Do you guys follow that logic? If Jesus is not returning, if God is done with his people, then there's nothing to fear. There's no consequences to fear. If there's no hope in waiting, like if there is nothing to wait for, then there's no reason for holy living. If nobody's coming back, we have all the authority. If nobody's coming back for us, then we can do what we want. And we get that, right? And we definitely get it because we've all seen Home Alone. right? Think about this. I kind of have this thing where I hate to talk about Christmas when it's not Christmas time. I don't even like to see like red and green together. But this is a very good illustration. This is what made it click for me, guys. Think about this. At the beginning of Home Alone, Kevin McAllister thinks that he's made his family disappear. And so he then gives himself a pass for everything, right? He is going to do everything that would have normally been prohibited by his parents. So he eats what he wants, he watches bad movies, he goes through all of Buzz's stuff, and he sleds down the inside stairs, right? He's saying they aren't coming back, so you do what you want, and think of the literal mess he makes. And now think of like what an analogy that is, what a strong metaphor that is, that Kevin makes such a mess in those opening scenes. So Peter, after describing these false teachers, he is now going to reference a well-known false teacher for his audience to make his point. Instead of Kevin McAllister, he is going to use Balaam. He says, okay, these false teachers, they have followed Balaam's path. And so we left 2 Peter and we went to the Old Testament, which we love to do. And it was really fun that Peter is sending us back to Numbers, because if you did our study last summer, that's the book that we were in. And so for our study this time, we were just in Numbers chapter 22. And guys, the context of the story is super important. So the Israelites, God's people under Moses, they had been wandering in the wilderness for about 40 years when this story happens. Hundreds of years before that, they had received a promise from a man named Abraham. This would be a covenant with Abraham, and it was a promise for lots of people and lots of blessing and lots of land. And when Balaam's story starts, the promises are about to come true. So the Israelites are a huge group of people, and they are on the verge of inheriting the promised land. Okay, so that is when the story kind of jumps over. It's kind of abrupt, it's kind of random. All of a sudden, the narrator is talking about the Moabite king named Balak, an evil pagan king. And he is threatened by God's people because they are so big in number. So Balak hires a man named Balaam. Okay, it's hard to keep him straight, I know. I also kept thinking that the donkey's name was Balaam. It's not. Who is Balaam? Balaam was like a professional seer, like S-E-E-R. He was a sorcerer. Maybe you could think of him as like a magician or a diviner. He essentially was like a prophet for hire. Okay, you could, if you paid him enough, he would consult any deity. Yahweh, sure. Any other fake gods, sure. He would take any side, really, that was beneficial for him. And he was supposed to be able to give omens or to give blessings or curses, depending on what the people ordered. And there's so much more to a story than what we read this week. But for some of you who maybe, or all of us, who maybe felt confused at times, like, okay, this man, it seems like God's talking with him. It seems like at some points he's gonna do what Balak says, and other times he's gonna do what God says. And I feel confused, and he was on his way to curse, but then he ends up blessing God's people. I think actually the confusion is the point. I think that there's something for us to see there. False teachers leave us in confusion, right? They make a mess of it. Things are not clear. What side are they really on? They trick us, and they can look so good at times. Didn't you feel that way with Balaam? They look like they're for us. Man, they look like they're on God's side. But what are they? They are wolves in sheep's clothing. Okay, so that's the summary of the story. Here's the humor of the story. I love this so much, guys. Here's where it gets really funny. On the way to curse God's people for the pagan king of Moab, Balaam's donkey, who, again, it's sad that she is nameless. I did not realize she was a she because I had this really funny joke in here that maybe we could call him Jack. Do you get my joke? It's a little inappropriate. I'm sorry. Somebody dared me to say it. But then I realized it was a girl donkey, which is weird. So her name is not Jack, obviously. Okay. Anyway, on the way to curse God's people, what happens, guys? The donkey sees an armed angel. blocking their path, not once or twice, but 3 times this donkey sees this armed angel. And so naturally, she changes course. She sees the angel. Balaam does not. Balaam could not see the reality. Do you catch this? The seer couldn't see what was right in front of him. He couldn't see the reality. This is called satire. This is hilarious irony, guys. We cannot miss this. And then it keeps going. The donkey speaks. And if that's not funny enough, did you catch that Balaam doesn't even seem to think it's weird that the donkey is talking? He just starts arguing with her. It's so funny. He just argues with her and shames her. But guys, what do we see here? God rules over Balaam, doesn't he? He's going to curse, and God says, you are going to bless. God rules over Balaam that he will speak when and what God intends, just like he did with the donkey. God ruled over the donkey to speak when he said speak. And then we're back in 2 Peter, and we realize that Peter was maybe the most poetic fisherman in all of history because he says that God used a donkey to restrain or leash, if you will, Balaam's madness. That's so funny. Do you get it? You're staring at me. No. Who restrains who? What's normal? The animal would be restrained. The animal would be leashed, right? And Peter, the fisherman, is being so subtle with his words that he is saying that the donkey did the restraining. Things are backwards. Things are upside down. The animal is more in tune than the human, right? The animal, the beast, has the moral and the spiritual high ground. The donkey reveals the truth. She is aware of the spiritual reality. She is aware of the impending judgment. But Balaam, in his greed and in his stubbornness, is blind and short-sighted. Okay, so do we see how Peter is doing this? After calling the false teachers irrational beast, he then uses a story about a beast who is more rational than the false teacher. It's just so good. The false teachers in Peter's day were just like Balaam. They were blind to what was right in front of them. And what was it? The return of Christ. They were blind to the coming of our just judge. They refused to see the impending judgment. Okay, aside from all the humor, we still have more questions to ask of the story. What are we supposed to feel when we read Numbers 22? Right? Like we see all these observations and we're trying to make connections, but we also have to remember the context of this. And when we put it in context, I think that what we're supposed to feel is a little bit of like, oh no, is Balaam going to make a mess of God's plan to bless his people? Like, I think it's supposed to make us feel a little bit of tension here. Like, oh no, God's plan, it's at risk right now. Is God's plan to bless his children, is it slipping through his fingers right now? The hope is lost for the people of God. The future is bleak and dark. It seems like Balaam is calling the shots. I think that that's what the author, what Moses has created in putting this story here in the book of Numbers. And I think that we would not be able to go any further into this weird story if we don't take this step of saying, what are we supposed to feel? And we create this tension by putting it in the context of the bigger story. And then we have the natural question of, so is there good news from this? Where is the comfort? Where is the answer to that tension? Guys, all the time I find myself in studying the Bible getting to like a dead end where I'm like, what is happening here, right? And when I get there, when I get a little bit frustrated or overwhelmed, I kind of stop and I ask myself a couple of more simple questions. And this is the one that kept me going in the story. What is the story teaching us about God? Seems like a really basic question, right? It's a really helpful question when we study the word. What is the story of the donkey teaching us about God? Hopefully you're noticing that we're asking that all the time, right? We talked about it last week, and Lexi kind of concluded that what we were learning about was God's justice, that he will handle the evil in the world. So what about this one? What does the story teach me about God? So I have 3 teenage boys. And when I worry about my boys and what false teachers they might encounter, this story comforts me. When I worry about what some subtle but powerful false teachers how they could tickle the ears of my boys, how they could bait them down a path of compromise or lies or enslaving sin, this story comforts me. When I worry that God's good plan of blessing for my children, his children, could be at risk, I need this story. Because what the story teaches me is that God is sovereign. God is sovereign. What that means is that God is in control. Not evil kings like Balak, not sorcerers like Balaam, not greedy false teachers like those in Peter's day. God is in control. Ladies, God is on his throne. God is on his throne and he's ruling. What I learned about God from this is that everything and everyone is under God's hand. Everything and everyone is under God's hand. And the longer I'm in 2 Peter, the more God's heart seemed to come to the surface. And I realized over and over again that God protects his people. He protects his church from false teachers. We saw it with Ananias and Sapphira last week, and we're seeing it with the story of Balaam this week. So let me ask you this question, the question that the story asked me this week. What fears of yours need this truth about God? I'm going to give you a second. This truth that everything and everyone is under God's hand. What area of your life needs this truth? Maybe is there a hope that has felt threatened or at risk? What would change if you saw maybe that situation or that person that feels like a threat? What if you saw that person, that situation as under God's good hand? This truth about God, it quiets my fear of man. Specifically. It quiets my fear of man, and it then weakens my desire to control people myself. Is it the same for you? What is it in your life? Everything and everyone is under God's good hand. God is on his throne. Isn't the Bible so beautiful? It's such a good story that this weird Old Testament story can help us understand 2 Peter chapter 2. And then with a little bit of work, we can see how it becomes incredibly practical or devotional or comforting for us. But then it keeps going, guys. It keeps opening up. So think about this. Balaam planned to curse the people of God, but God ruled over him and turned the curse into a blessing, right? And a couple chapters later, God does it again. He makes Balaam, against his will, speak God's message. And a couple chapters later, Balaam speaks this beautiful poetry. It's I think an oracle. And we actually looked at it last week, kind of because it tied into our theme of light. Numbers 24:17 says this, but now we know the guy who is saying it. He says, I see him now. I see him, but not now. I perceive him, but not near. Okay, it actually helps me understand him. I picture a man looking into a crystal ball, right? He was that kind of guy, like a seer, a sorcerer, a magician. And so you can almost picture him. I don't think these actually existed, but like from our Disney movies or whatever, he's like seeing something slowly coming into view. And he says, I see him, but not now. I perceive him, but not near. Like something in the future is coming. And then this is what he says. A star will come from Jacob, and a scepter will arise from Israel. He will smash the forehead of Moab. So, ladies, do you see it? Do you see what he's talking about here? Do you see the promise of Jesus from the mouth of Balaam here? Guys, God can use anyone. God can use anything, not just donkeys, but donkeys of a man too, to speak light into darkness, right? Hope to a waiting world. Balaam speaks of a star over Israel. Are you picturing a star over a manger scene? And Balaam speaks of a scepter for Israel. And maybe you're then thinking about this baby who was born king of the Jews, right? And then what is that next line that he says? He will smash the forehead of Moab. It's our snake crusher from week 1. Balaam is prophesying about Jesus here because God ruled over him. Here is our snake crusher. In his death, the promised king will crush the head of the enemy. It's our gospel message deep in the Old Testament that we found because we're studying an epistle at the end of the New Testament. But I want you to picture this. He will crush the forehead of Moab. And think about what we've been observing from the story of this donkey, guys. Picture the scene of Jesus' death. Against a darkened sky and a silent heavens, guys, as Jesus was beaten, as Jesus was pierced, and as he was mocked, did it not look like God had lost his grip on his plan to bless his children? If ever there was a time where it looked like God's plan to bless was slipping through his fingers, that someone else had taken control, that Satan had surely taken control over God at that time, this would have been the moment. But even then, no, especially then, God was in sovereign control. Let our minds be blown. Even then, as Jesus took our sin and breathed his last, everything was still under God's mighty hand, as the curse of sin became a blessing for his children in Jesus. So we kept moving through 2 Peter, and we kept using other parts of the Bible to help us to navigate, to build up what it was that Peter wants us to understand about how he grew, about how he wants his audience to grow, about how to handle these false teachers, guys. And so we let 2 Peter lead us to another story of Peter's time with Jesus. And we read the story about Jesus and Peter walking on the water. And guys, this story ripped me up this week in the best of ways. So again, the context has to be considered first. So what did we read in Matthew chapter 14? Immediately, Jesus made the disciples get into the boat and go ahead of him to the other side while he dismissed the crowds. After dismissing the crowds, he went up on the mountain by himself to pray. Well into the night, he was there alone. Just like Balaam's story, this context is going to create an important tension for us, guys. We need to slow down and be real enough with the Bible that we feel it, where we say, oh no, why in the world would Jesus leave them alone? Jesus, who knows all things, would know that a storm was coming. So why would he send them ahead? Is Jesus cruel? I thought he was here to bless. And hours pass for the disciples, and a storm rolls in. They are far from the shore. We read that they are battered by the waves, that the wind was against them. And make sure you're actually picturing it, guys, because then it says, and very early in the morning, so as dawn is about to break, Jesus comes to them, walking on the sea. And rightly so, they are terrified, right? They think that he's a ghost, and you're like, could they have a worse night? This would be horrible I kind of just let it hit me for the first time. Like, that's going from bad to worse, right? They are all alone, they are exhausted, they are terrified, and now they think they see a ghost. And so Jesus speaks up. And what he does in this next part, there's so much to it, guys. He kind of pulls in some important references to the Old Testament. So there's a couple things that we wouldn't maybe catch because we're not Jewish men, right? These men would have known that what the Old Testament taught is that God alone can walk on the seas. There's a verse in the book of Job that these men probably would have known that says, since God is the creator of the seas, then he can trample the seas. Okay, but it's not just that. Did you notice how Jesus responded to them? He doesn't just say, hey guys, it's me, Jesus, right? Hey, don't you recognize me? No, what does he say? He says, it is I, which sounds a little formal, a little weird, right? Why do you think he said that? I think that what he's doing here is he is wanting his disciples to link how he introduces himself with an introduction way back in the book of Exodus. Do you remember when God introduced himself to Moses at the burning bush? And what did God say? I am who I am. And in the original language, that would have been firing for the disciples. So what is Jesus doing right here? He's not just saying, hey, don't worry, I'm not a ghost. Hey, don't worry, I'm Jesus. He's saying way more than that. He's saying, I am Yahweh. Jesus, once again, is showing his disciples his deity, that he is God. So again, dawn is breaking, and if you're picturing it, maybe it's that moment when that morning light is just starting to change the colors of the night sky. And here's Peter, and he sees the godness of Jesus, and he sees the lordship of Jesus over the seas, and so he's got to respond, right? And so he says, if it's you, command me to come to you. And we're like, yes, Peter, you're displaying faith. And look, you tethered it to who Jesus is. And we're like, yay, good job, Peter. You weren't weird, right? Like you responded with faith and you were brave. And we're so proud of you. But then what happens? When Peter saw the strength of the wind, he was afraid. And beginning to sink, he cried out, Lord, save me. Where did Peter go wrong? Do you guys see it? He looked away from Jesus, right? He got distracted by the waves, by the storm. I mean, here was Jesus right in front of him. But the storm stole his attention. Here was Jesus, but Peter couldn't see the creator of the seas right there, the God of the waters right in front of him. And this is another one of those points where I think I already said this a couple weeks ago, but I just want to scream into the pages. I want to scream into the past and say, Peter, you were doing so well. Peter, don't look to the right or to the left. Don't look at your circumstances. Look to Jesus. Peter, pay attention. Peter, lock eyes with Jesus. But if you think about it, Peter is going to have more nights like this. Peter is going to have more nights where his faith needed supplemented. And for the first time, I thought of the story next to the story of Peter's denial of Christ. And I had that same instinct again. I just wanted to encourage him, not yell, encourage him. Peter, you were doing so well. Just pay attention. That night in the courtyard, that night around the charcoal fire, Peter, don't get distracted. Not by the circumstances, not by your fears, by the risk. Keep your eyes on Jesus. Peter, you know who he is. You know he is mighty to save. So pay attention. Stay focused. But we know that he didn't. We know that he again looked at the circumstances, and this time it's not the wind and the waves, but maybe it's the Roman soldiers and the angry mob. And so Peter denied Jesus, not once, not twice, but 3 times. And then the rooster crowed. And then what did we read? The rooster crowed, and then he made eye contact with Jesus. And didn't it just send chills down our spine when we read that in that moment, Peter went outside and wept bitterly? What a sinking feeling Peter must have had yet again. And I've never seen it before this study, but I heard someone say that this rooster was a mercy for Peter. God spoke through this irrational bird. And do you see the irony? I mean, we looked at it in our homework, this little bit of irony that the rooster would have been a wake-up call for Peter. Wake up, Peter. You've got to see the spiritual reality. Peter, wake up. You have got to see that you have sinned, that you have been unfaithful. The storm that night held so much purpose. And so did the rooster. They taught Peter how much he still needed Jesus, right? The storm and the rooster, they taught Peter how much he still needed Jesus. And what fills my prayer journal the last couple weeks is that storm and that rooster, they showed Peter how much he needed Jesus' hand on him. And guys, this is me. I have faith, but I have fear too. You too? Like, I have faith, but I also really need my faith to grow. And so I have to conclude that I need storms and that I need roosters, if you will. So ladies, like Peter, when we see who Jesus is with increasing clarity, as we grow and see him for who he is, we will respond. It will be natural, just like we saw in chapter 1. But isn't it true that so often it takes a storm to open our eyes? It takes suffering for us to see. Ladies, isn't it true that there is a growth that comes through suffering, through storms, through wind, through waves, through battering? And there are visions of Jesus, and there are lessons, and there is courage that comes most powerfully after long, dark nights. Isn't that the beauty of this story? When we feel afraid, or when we get distracted, or when we look elsewhere, guys, Jesus sees our faith, even if it's small. Yes, Peter had faith. Jesus sees it, and what did he do? He delighted to reach out his hand and save. What did Jesus do? Peter starts sinking, which is so interesting that he had a slow sink. And he says, save me. And what does Jesus do? It says immediately, the word is repeated, immediately, Jesus reached out his hand and caught hold of him. I love that verse. It's my favorite verse in 2 Peter, and it's not even in 2 Peter. I don't know what storms God will permit to come my way. I don't know what storms God will purpose or allow to come my way, guys. I don't know what my future holds, like you don't know what your future holds. But guys, what I do know is that I want Jesus' hand on me, like it was on Peter. It's like the answer is starting to come into focus of like, how did Peter grow so much? And we're just seeing over and over again, Jesus' hand was on him. I want every circumstance in my life, whether it's like dramatic and public or private and quiet, whether it's like a big sweeping loss or a subtle inconvenience, if it I want those things to be a means of grace in my life, a means of bringing me near to Jesus. Don't you? So ladies, how do you respond to the storms in your life? Right? This is not an easy question to verbalize or start to articulate, but how do you grapple with the fact that there are no storms that hit our life without God's permission, without God's foreknowledge? So when you feel alone, or when the darkness is thick, when you feel bad or just beat up, do you sense in that moment God is at work? Essentially, we're asking in that moment when you are suffering, are you hopeless? Or do you have this deeply abiding hope that in that storm, in that loss, in that fear, in that confusion, God is at work? Because ladies, storms can wash our feet, our sometimes sinking feet. Storms can come and they can sanctify us. They can remove our fear, or like with Peter, maybe it's overconfidence, and allow us to become aware that Jesus' hand is on us. So second application for the night is, what storms of yours need this truth about Jesus? What circumstances need this truth that his hand is on you? His hand, his steadying hand, right? If you can picture it in Peter's story, his sanctifying hand is on you. When we believe that Jesus' hand is on us, what happens is it quiets our fears. And it brings us peace, no matter the circumstances, right? It doesn't mean the storm stops right away. Sometimes it does, but sometimes a peace comes even before the storm stops. So what did Peter learn that night? We asked this question. We don't know, but it sure is a fun thing to brainstorm. Maybe he learned that he was not the hero that Jesus is. Maybe Peter learned that he had faith, but that he would need to supplement it. Supplement it in times of ease so that he could flex it during times of storms. And maybe he learned the importance of keeping his eyes on Jesus, to pay attention to Jesus, the light in the darkness, the hope of his future. And I don't know, but maybe this dramatic night on the seas, that very brief faith walk as the day dawned, maybe this was the memory that Peter was recalling when he wrote this part of 2 Peter. We also have the prophetic word strongly confirmed, and you will do well to pay attention to it as to a lamp shining in a dark place until the day dawns and the morning star rises in your hearts. Let's pray as we head into worship. Lord, I pray that worship would just be a continuation of your word speaking to us, to your church, to your children, to your people. And Lord, I pray that you would empower us and enable us to be honest with you as we respond tonight, Lord. That we would offer up our little bit of faith that says that we believe you're ruling from your throne and that everything is under your hand. Show us how to make it practical, Lord. Show us what fears we can let go of, what attempts to control we can surrender. And Lord, open our eyes to see you, to see your hand in our life. And I pray that we would feel so much comfort and so much awe for what a good God you are, Lord. Be magnified, be glorified. Let your spirit fill this room and do a good work in us, Lord, as we worship and as we share with one another. Amen. You guys want to stand?